We live in a fast-paced and hectic world where it's easy to feel overwhelmed, stressed, and out of control. How do you manage all the competing pressures without losing sense of yourself? How do you stay focused enough to not only plot a path, but follow it? Welcome to Master Your Life, a show that offers inspiration, insight, and intelligence, as well as success stories from many walks of life that can show you how you can control your own destiny. Our knowledgeable and entertaining host and her guests give practical advice that you can use every day in the quest to master your life. Now, here's your host, Leaha Mattinson.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the episode today. I'm host Leaha Mattinson. I'm joined by my wonderful guest, Dr. 𝙇𝙞𝙩𝙩. Dr. Dave, how are you today?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. Thanks, Leaha. Yeah, great to be back.
Great to have you back. So for those of you who haven't caught our previous episodes, please go and check on the 𝑸𝒖𝒐𝒕𝒂𝒃𝒍𝒆 website. For we've talked about everything from birth to death, sexual energy, and patient preference of care. So some really important topics. In today's episode, what we're going to focus in on is grief. And I particularly thought this was an important thing to talk about because recently my wonderful father passed away. So just a few weeks ago, it's just getting close to a month ago. And so it's very fresh on my mind and in my heart. And so I want to also say thank you to everyone who's tuned into all of these episodes. You know, for the span of almost 7 years now, Master Your Life really has been a show of insight, intelligence, and inspiration to help people live a better life. And part of this show theme really was birthed by my parents, my father being an important part of that dyad, because to me, he was such a morally intelligent person and somebody who I wanted to pay always respect and tribute to. And so with that in mind, if you have lost anybody in your life that is important to you, whether they were awesome or full of shenanigans, it doesn't matter. There's just this process of grieving that I think is important that we talk about. And Dr. Dave has been kind enough to come on, and we'll talk about what happens with our physiology, our neurology, how we can maybe manage through it, and really to focus in on how do we pay tribute to the process of grieving. So Dr. Dave, can you take it away? What do you think about grieving or grief?
Absolutely. And first off, I'm very sorry for your loss there, and I hope things are going the best that they can be. It had such a hard time for yourself. Grief is all around us, and it doesn't have to be a death for us to feel some sort of grieving process with things as well. Obviously, death is going, especially of a loved one, is going to be the most intense and worse off situation that we can ever really imagine, and we can never be prepared for it, no matter what happens. And there's going to be all sorts of physical things that happen to somebody during these times that are extremely stressful, and it's going to take an impact, and it's going to take time to heal from.
Yeah, as what from my experience anyway, we were so lucky because we've talked about my dad lots on this Master Your Life podcast, and he had Huntington's disease. So he was 83 years old when he passed away, which is very far along in the progress, usually of age. It's much younger that people pass away. And he was in pretty good health, but we noticed a decline, sort of happening, really declining in the last few weeks, and so I made a decision to move back in with my parents to help them stay in their home because I wanted to have the opportunity to actually help them to stay there. And with this whole shenanigan fest of COVID happening, people not being able to actually go into hospitals or long-term care facilities to be with their loved ones when they're departing from this plane, that just didn't sit right with me. So part of my what I'm so glad that I did was that I made a decision to actually go, hey, what can I do here to be of help? And that was part of me handling, I think, the grieving process way earlier than before he left, because there was all kinds of things that were happening that he was losing his ability to do, and that, that we're changing how we managed as a family, so that the grieving process was happening much earlier on, and then the kind of the 𝑑𝙞𝙩𝙀𝙗𝙪 is the day that the person passes away. So and every person will have their own story, right? Yes.
Yeah. And just kind of as an outside observer, knowing you for a while there, that's I think the process you went through was the best you can get to ideal. You were there to kind of enjoy and work on his health as best you could during that time. And he talked about all these little wins you had along the way with him as well. And then, of course, yeah, in those disease processes, there can be a quick decline as well. And really, in those cases, it goes from being as alert as possible to having something that's not long and drawn out. And I think you definitely set things up to have that last moments of a very loving relationship, and as close to possible as you can to having somebody healthy in the situation that he was given.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Dave. And what I want people to recognize too, and especially thank you for, is because you were part of this process, because every Friday when I got on chat with you, I'd be like, okay, so here's what we're seeing at home, and when you were explaining just how things, work backwards, we have this we come into life, and then we exit the opposite way. And so I could start to align what I was seeing in his behavior and his experience with exactly what was going on neurologically. And then we could actually respond appropriately. So instead of expecting, for example, him to be able to do stuff in that fully functional way, I could just say, oh, it's like he's kind of in that toddler phase. There might be like this, like disagreeableness, let's call it. And then how we would deal with that is to be just joking around, and kind of joking around and making fun of things and making light of things. And then he would laugh. And then, even further down, it was just like, or, closer to the end of life, going, that he's even younger, and what would be the things that would bring him happiness. And so we wrapped his Christmas gifts in just like fun paper, and just jubilant colors, or things that would be nice, and that would be completely not the same as what you would do, like, wrapping it all, very stoically with the perfect bows and the perfect perfect color of man wrapping paper. We didn't do that. It's like we actually went back to where he was. It was just like, and he was happy. Totally. Oh yeah. Yeah, it was. And that was part and parcel because of me having a better understanding, thanks to you, about actually how this whole thing rewinds, and how important it is to know that, because I could then respect his journey and ours as well. So my mom and I as well, because I would just say to her, okay, Mom, like, here's what's going on. And she'd go, oh yeah, that makes such good sense. And then we'd, scurry off to do it a different way. And it was progressed very quickly. So day to day, we could see things changing. And it just became this game between us caregivers to go, okay, well, then, okay, what do we do today? And yeah. So thank you. That was, invaluable. Absolutely invaluable.
Mm-hmm. What a gift.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yes. What a gift to the whole family. Again, it's like why it's so important, I think, for people to understand what's going on neurologically, shows up behaviorally and psychologically, for the person who you're caring for, and for us too, right? So that how do we then take that information, or how do we become more curious about how to help people depart, but also to handle our own grieving, and what's the introspection and contemplation that we could allow in order to really pay tribute to the people or the processes, the things that we've lost, that we're letting go of, the changes in life. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And the biggest thing right now, especially in the early stages of grief, is finding those things that we can hold on to, that make us feel a little bit better, or help us to move along with the sadness. And and let it flow instead of trying to stop it. And a lot of it's not going to make sense.
Right.
And that's completely fine. It's not supposed to. And it's just a matter of working through it. I think the worst cases are people that have blockages when they're going through the grief process, and basically, like, yeah, the brain fires at certain frequencies and everything else, so that if it's if there's a stressful event that's triggering something and it's not able to kind of work the way it's supposed to, then the brain gets very efficient in the way it's firing, and people can carry those things on for a long period of time, if not for forever in some extents. And I think that's the thing that people really need to understand, is that you need to let things just kind of flow and work their way out, so that we don't end up with these horrible blockages or pathways that become overdeveloped, and other ones that should kind of start to come online as the process goes along. And yeah, as you mentioned, right now there's a lot of people out there who aren't able to be able to go through a proper grieving process, because of events going on, or because of the situation they're in as well. So a lot of what we can kind of discuss might go into that as well.
So specifically, what gets blocked when you say there could be blockages? What is it that's getting blocked?
I think a lot of people try to distract themselves instead of feeling it. It's like, you've got this huge, intense experience that's just happened to you, and the brain needs to be able to feel it, and to actually go through what that's like. Otherwise, it's kind of had this huge response to, and like, well, if I made this huge loud noise beside you, and you weren't able to react or move to it, then you kind of have that angst that stays with you for a while afterwards. Well, imagine something that's even more intense than that, being the emotional feeling of someone you've loved and cared for your entire life. So if you're not able to actually react and do something with that experience, then it kind of gets bottled up. And if it gets bottled up, of course, that energy, those pathways are just going to reinforce themselves and show up in other ways in your life that you didn't expect they would.
Mm-hmm. And I love this thought, or something, food for thought for people, is in Western culture, we've really been taught to just get up and get on with things. Rub some dirt in it, keep going, you'll be fine. Or like, so it's very, we become almost psychopathic about not, there's a pathology that's created when you actually can't feel your feelings anymore, because you've not been allowed to grieve maybe throughout your lifetime. So maybe you've had lots of traumas, or lots of times when you could have or should have been grieving and feeling something. And as a child, maybe you've been told, to pick yourself up and dust yourself off and get back in the saddle, and don't talk about anything, don't trust, we're not sharing any feelings here. So as you go through the decades, the brain actually becomes blocked. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. And like with any traumatic event, basically how you come out of it is how you go into it as well. So if things are already kind of not working properly in different circuits, or with processing different emotions, then it's going to be even worse on the other side when something bigger happens. And of course, this is the early stage of grief, trauma, and everything else that we're talking about. And the dusting yourself off, well, eventually there'll become a point where that needs to occur. that we can't stay in that mode forever. And that's why counselors, psychologists will go through different phases of grief. And it makes perfect sense that, yeah, there is a pattern to it in most cases. People that go into these traumatic and stressful events already inflamed and already with a brain that's not working at the way it should be are going to be the ones that usually end up with way worse brain fog, deterioration, depression, and everything else that goes along with trauma.
Mm-hmm.
It's physical or it's emotional.
Yeah. And I think maybe we also dissociate.
Big time. Absolutely. Yeah.
It's just like, okay, what am I supposed, whatever, let's just carry on. And that's a coping tool that's, again, taught from a very young age. So there's lots of, I guess I'm exploring my own experience and inviting other people to do the same, because I think this is a generational thing as well, where don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, and carry on, because that's actually what you're supposed to be doing in your life, not, turning into a big puddle of emotion.
Right.
But and so we're also, you forget how much, how much trauma there is as well, because you've got it encapsulated somewhere along the way to deal with later. Oh, I'll deal with that later. I'll deal with it later. And then the later never comes, and then you've got your next thing, and it's another thing on the stack of the fire of things that need to be felt and grieved. And the reason why it's so important, in my mind anyway, or in my heart, is that we don't actually resolve the trauma if we don't feel the emotions. And so the repeated pattern of not feeling stuff keeps us doing things or not dealing with things, and then making poor decisions in our lives.
Yeah. It's going to show up somewhere else in another stressful situation.
Mm-hmm.
There's how we process and handle stress is going to commonly pop up throughout our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So it might not be the same stressful experience or even closely related to it, but how the brain's programmed to respond to it is going to have been changed by all these experiences. And if it wasn't able to do it properly during that intense event, it's probably going to kind of go haywire when you have less intense events going on.
Do you have any clinical stories that kind of show that progression? Because I can think of personal ones, but I'm not quite sure if I want to share today or not. So it's just, but I know some things that I go, man, if I would have dealt with this in a different way or felt it.
Right. Yeah. One case that really pops up to me was, and completely different stressful traumatic event, obviously. She was sitting down with a few sessions of neurofeedback. So that's where we put the cap over the head, and we're looking at how we can change different brain waves just by operant conditioning. So giving the brain a reward, whether it's a piece of sound, a video, or what have you. And I go in and constantly check on people, but also just to make sure everything's running. I find too that people are able to relax a lot better with me outside the room. So I pop in there and everything's going fine, and then the session ends, and I start taking the cap off and everything else, and I can tell that she's kind of more tense, and especially after a session that should be really relaxing, and boy, did she kind of rush out of that room and leave.
Mm-hmm.
And then next day she starts to explain what happened was that she basically had this flashback during the session of when she was sexually abused years, like decades beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes, I felt it, and then it was like a wave of release just happened. And she goes, I can't believe something from that long ago that I've done all this stuff for and have moved on from would be affecting me like that.
Mm.
And that this one session, it just was a release for her. Obviously, it was a huge kind of smack of emotion and flashback, and then once again a wave of things just going away. So for her, that was absolutely amazing experience, and it also taught me as a clinician very early on that, yeah, you're dealing with the nervous system, which can obviously trigger all these memories, thoughts, or pathways of trauma from beforehand. And yeah, you need to be on your toes to kind of identify that and help people out, or to refer them to a counselor, psychologist, and someone in that realm that's going to help them process that emotion even better than obviously I can as a clinician. So, but yeah, there's all sorts of other techniques out there too that they work on different stimulation patterns to release different tensions and energy people have. And all of these have kind of been developed through decades, centuries, all these time periods. And the actual kind of energy flow of whatever impulses through the nervous system and the body, really our understanding of it is very limited. But over all these time periods, methods to help us cope, help us to become better have developed. And then of course technology now throws another level into it of hopefully how we can get people to have more of these experiences, to release that horrible energy that's being bottled up inside of them for far too long, and get them feeling and performing at a new level that just makes life so much more enriching and enjoying.
And I love that you mentioned the technology that's available now. So I will say that if anyone wants to talk to Dr. Dave, they can reach him via his social media. And he's available out of the Red Deer Collegiate Sports Center in Red Deer, Alberta, Canada. And he will take your emails, and he will certainly say you can find practitioners in your area that maybe have a similar skill set to be able to help you to process things using technology. And I love also the sort of the mining for things that you don't even know are there. Because again, the brain's so good at hiding stuff, right? It's just like, where did that come from? Hold on. And it's a trickster. So we're constantly, if we're aware or conscious, we're constantly trying to go, okay, well, where'd that come from? Or where'd that thought come from? Or that feeling come from? Or is it even a feeling or is it just a thought? What's going on in my body? So let's go back to the body, because the body is the big telltale sign of something is not right here. Right. So if you're wondering if you're grieving, it's like, and you go, I don't know, maybe I should feel sorry about this thing or sad about this thing, or I should feel more loss about this things, but I really don't, because I'm kind of numb. And I seem to have been that way for, the last 40, 50 years. What would be some of the signs that a person could look at their physiology and, self-diagnose things are not right here?
Basically, just what you said, that numb, dull, kind of run down state that people can get into. So with that, you're looking at a brain that's just not firing properly through all the different circuits. And you get the depression side of things as well. During a stressful event, of course, your stress chemistry just lights up like nothing else. And once again, you can prepare all you want for these events and think you have it, but once it happens, it's completely different. And the stress chemistry is just gonna pump out like nothing else. So cortisol, your major stress hormone, is what's called a glucocorticoid. So basically glucose, sugar, corticoid, steroid. So it's a sugar steroid. It's there.
Sounds good to me. It's like sugar steroids.
Yeah,
It's like a unicorn. Here it comes.
a very bad unicorn.
Oh, it's a dark unicorn. But I know people will be thinking that sounds really good. Sugar and
Well, that
it
goes
sounds
into
sweet.
sugar cravings people have during these
Yes.
events, is because
Yes.
stress hormones are causing the body to signal, hey, I need more energy and fuel to come in. So then we get into the comfort foods. And of course, it's way too much comfort food. So stress chemistry is through the roof saying, eat sugar, eat sugar. And then, of course, the longer the stress chemistry stays in our system, then the more the receptors get desensitized. So then, of course, you start to run into blood sugar regulation issues as well. So then the brain's not getting the fuel it should, the body's not getting the, the fuel it should. Then you also get all sorts of changes in the immune system. So of course, when we're depressed, we're more susceptible to infections and everything else. And during the grieving process, after somebody dies, your immune system shifts functions. And so one of them is you get more neutrophils. Well, neutrophils are there to go in and first kind of attack things that come into the body. And they should be in the system for a few days. And then once they eat up whatever bacteria or pathogens there, then they get eaten up by another immune cell. But if they don't get eaten up by those other immune cells, then they burst and they release all these nasty chemicals, which cause more of an inflammatory process, and you start to get more of a cascade. And then, of course, if your immune system becomes even more flamed up, the brain being the most immune regulated organ in the body is going to start feeling basically brain fog, depression, and not work itself. Because you've got this overactive immune response going on, too many inflammatory chemicals, and of course, all these immune cells that are coming across and cutting some of the connections in the brain. So then you start to kind of lose memory and everything else. So if that stays in the system way too long, then those symptoms of numbness and everything else start to turn into basically cognitive decline and all the things that we don't want in the aging process with ourselves. So the first thing is, let it out so that these things can run its course. But you also kind of, once again, if you go into a stressful situation like death and everything else already inflamed, then you're going to come out worse. So the people that are listening to this podcast that maybe aren't going through this experience right now, they need to realize that, once again, the healthier you are, the better prepared you are for these situations when they do happen in life. And then if they are happening in life and you're still feeling yourself kind of numb and things just aren't functioning in the brain properly, we need to look at ways to start to get that stress chemistry to be more appropriate instead of just downing a whole bunch of caffeine and sugars all the time. And we need to get the system back online so that you're able to move past things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great points. I was thinking, it's like, don't use your grief as an excuse to treat yourself poorly. So that's one of the things in our culture that really is like, people show up with all kinds of food because, they're helping you to grieve, or the grieving process. And sometimes that's not that great. Some of it's not that great for the actual grieving process because it's full of sugar and things that don't necessarily support the emotional sort of healing. It's brought in with absolute love. And so part of that is I'm absolutely certain also sort of leveled out because of the energy that it's brought in. But it's you can get into the habit of soothing yourself a little too long with all that things
Yeah,
like that.
and being in acute, like right when it happens,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, of course you're going to want that, and it's going to make you feel better because yeah, you're reacting to the chemicals and the signals that are going on in your body. But letting it go on too long is when people get stuck again. And that grieving process can never finish because now you're just supporting abnormal chemistry within your body, which then, of course, is going to send abnormal signals to the brain, and you're just going to get stuck in this horrible process again. So,
Yeah. And key too, I think one of the things that I was appreciative of having or knowing is about Qigong, because one of the cultural expectations is, of course, that your, shoulders are slumped forward and that your head is down. And when you're sad and crying, that is the position that you're in, but it's also the thing that tricks your nervous system into depression.
definitely.
So it's just like we're crying, we're all curled up like balls. We're in Canada. It was like -41 when the week my dad passed away. It was so cold. So like even having the funeral was interesting, but just because it was so cold. But it was also good because we could just keep the crowd to a little bit smaller and maybe take a little more time just for going through the process. But we were all curled up in blankets, so we're all curled up in blankets. Curled up is the position of also shutting down that or activating depression almost. Like, can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, when our frontal lobes are firing better, they're going to inhibit emotional regulation, and but they also inhibit autonomics, so heart rate, blood pressure, but also postural muscles of extensors. So yeah, you can tell a lot by looking at somebody's posture, what's going on in different parts of the brain. And then as you talk with somebody, you can always kind of, okay, yeah, I was kind of right that the way their facial expressions were looking and how they were hunched over, and then talking with them, there's something more going on that they're maybe not telling me, and I need to be kind with that person. Our stranger, of course, it's our loved one that's maybe holding it in.
Right, that's maybe holding it in.
Yes.
Maybe holding it in. Yes. So that whole like sitting up, putting your shoulders back.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And movement is key to things. And yeah. But the thing is, you're already in this state where, of course, the body wants to kind of relax and heal. You've got to let it do that. But at the same time, there still needs to be movement to activate the system. So you're just doing it more frequently in smaller doses to get through things. The thing with cortisol and all these stress chemicals is you're supposed to basically burn things off and not let them just settle there. There's metabolic processes during a stressful situation to move and use up that sugar that's being signaled to go into the body and cells. And you're supposed to move around and burn off some of that and get rid of that energy instead of letting it all settle there and just cause issues. So movements and touch and feel is very important. So obviously, yeah, go get that massage or adjustment or take part of that dancing class or anything else, but do it at a rate that feels good and helps with the actual processes that are going on. I wouldn't recommend people go into like a high intensity workout and overdo things, because that produces more inflammatory cascades and makes people worse as well. So a lot of people will just go into that mode where it's like, no, I got to clean the dishes. After this, I got to go do that. I got to walk the dog. I got to make it to exercise class. And they're just doing everything possible to stay way too overactive. And they're just building up more and more of the stress chemistry, adding on more inflammatory things. And eventually it's going to become very unsustainable.
Because what happens when you do that? Because this is important, because I think a lot of people do that strategy. Lots, millions. Yeah. So what actually happens to people when they do that? What's the unfortunate consequences of toughing it out, of quote unquote, like,
yeah, you're going to be run into basically, well, especially with the stress chemicals, you're going to eventually, with doing too much, probably blood sugar issues. You're going to have all these inflammatory markers. So now you're looking at cholesterol starting to build up in the arteries. You're looking at muscles that aren't able to really regenerate the way they should, and joints and tissues as well. So then you're going to run into more muscular skeletal pain. Blood's going to be shunted more away from the digestive organs, and once again, to keep us in that go-go state. So then people might run into periods of headaches and everything else. And then, of course, your immune system will shift and you won't be able to fight off pathogens and bugs as well. So then you're more susceptible to becoming sick. Another part of the grieving process and stress is you produce less natural killer cells, which is responsible for also cleaning out cancer cells in your system. So this might be one of the multiple mechanisms of why people will develop different cancers later in life, and especially if they've had stressful or traumatic events earlier on. So it becomes this downward cascade of so many different things not working properly. And health really is not just one thing. When things go wrong, we start to look for just that one thing or one cure, but it's multiple things that are leading up to whether we're healthy or whether we start to get sick later on as well.
Yeah. And the people who are listening to this podcast are people who are seeking ways to bring balance to that fulcrum of how much exercise, how much rest, how much sleep, how do I make sure that I am hanging out with people, but still make sure that I'm getting enough alone time to make sure I've got a good immune system. So I know when people are listening to this or watching us on the videos that they're introspective and asking themselves those questions. However, when grief hits, sometimes that even the introspection and asking questions can get side railed. What's going on there? Like, what's happening with that?
Yeah, we're hijacked back into primitive ways of thinking and being. It doesn't take much for us to revert back in development, and that's why you see people react the way they do. Oh, I just asked you for the bill, or what, or oh geez, you cut me off in traffic, or something of that nature. And of course we can program ourselves to be more hyper vigilant in traffic, but too, it's an example of how people will overreact. Is basically, the brain's not functioning at the level it should because of all these things that have happened. And it's such a key to go through the process properly, support yourself both emotionally and physically though, and move through it at your pace type thing. And the thing too is, we'll go through, like I've always heard with grief, you go through 3 stages, and I've felt it too, like with relationships that have broken up, or with jobs and everything else. First time it's hurt, and then hate, and then heal. Well, the hurt part is very much kind of, once again, more your feeling centers. And they've done studies on depression that depression is usually the right brain being more active than the left brain. So the right brain, right frontal areas, they process more fear, sadness, disgust, your withdrawal emotions. And you need to go through that hurt stage, because that's the stimulus that was sent into the body, and that's where it's being processed. But then later people will go into that hate stage. And that's going to be more reacting to the outside world and everything else. So that's going to be more left brain. But the left brain's also more responsible for happiness, surprise, anger emotions.
Yeah, and
So
surprise doesn't mean surprise and delight. Surprise means, oh, what was that?
reacting to something.
Right.
All of those are even loops between one kind of set and the other is what you're going to see in people as these as the processing's happening. And it's not a bad thing to see somebody go from being depressed to acting out. And it just kind of means, once again, okay, a different part of the system's being activated. And maybe that's a good thing, because instead of just staying in that sadness part there, you've moved to another part of the brain that's closer to the emotion of happiness. Mm-hmm. But then, of course, if you get stuck there, then you can very much become programmed and efficient at staying in anger instead of moving into happiness as well. So that kind of, yeah, it's all this energy being absorbed and released. Mm-hmm. And then the healing stage is needs to happen after that. That, okay, the energy is being released, and now it's a bit of calmness and everything else to move along with things and repair all the damage that's happened in the physiology from this.
Yes, and I love the distinction between the left and the right brain, because we've really been trained to be quite left-brained. And even in our right brain, what we'll say is, oh, I think I'm having a feeling. I think I'm having a feeling means it's coming from the left brain. And so the social construction of whatever I'm supposed to be feeling, and then you play a part. Oh, I'm supposed to be feeling this way, but I'm not really feeling it. So when's that feeling going to come? Oh, and so the right brain is the feeling center. But a lot of us have been really told to not feel anything. Or if you do feel something, get over to left brain as soon as humanly possible. And maybe that's why the anger happens, Dr. Dave, because I think that when we don't actually allow ourselves to feel the real feelings, that we can't actually examine why we're feeling that way either. So when we come out of the feeling, and my loss was a big loss of a human being. But if you lose your first pet, if you lose that's also a big loss. But you fail your first test, your first kiss wasn't what you expected it was going to be. Like the million things that we have in our lives that we kind of go, well, that didn't exactly turn out the way that I wanted, or didn't feel the way I thought it was going to feel. That if we don't feel that, though, and understand why it didn't feel that way, so maybe you didn't pick a good partner. And so instead of being angry at the partner, it's going, my choices were kind of a wacky-do job there. What was I thinking? So it's the emotion of feeling how much hurt there is that actually can also be that bridge to making better choices. So maybe your life mate is not going to be someone who hurts you constantly or who you hurt constantly. Maybe there's going to be growth from that pain where you're then going to go, okay, going to make different choices. But I think when what I see a lot of people do is they get hurt or they're grieving something, and then they point outwardly to the other thing creating that hurt, and they don't learn anything from it. They just keep doing the same thing over and over again. And so to your woman who had the sexual abuse experience, I think this is something that really happens for millions and millions of people, as they've been sexually abused when they're young. And we've talked about this on another episode, so feel free to tune into that one. But there's something there that happens that makes people make poor decisions all the way along that cause that, and they don't feel. So they don't have that filter to go, I need to make different choices in partners, relationships, how I manage my life, how I feed myself. And so that accumulates to all of this, physical devastation, emotional devastation. But because we haven't actually felt that first feeling and really acknowledged it, and then gone, why was I not so freaking outraged by that thing that I stood up for myself and I changed things? So we're really, we have this golden opportunity, I guess, I think, when we're having these really important times of mourning, times of loss and reverence and savoring, to understand what is causing that feeling and then to do something different with it.
Definitely. And yeah, on top of that is we've been isolating it down to basically one or two emotions at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the reason why a lot of people stick in these patterns is we don't feel just one emotion at a time. We feel multiple different things and have to process multiple different things.
Okay.
So yeah, an abusive situation, there's feelings of shame, disgust, but there's probably also excitement at the same time, which of course are contraindicated. And there's all these multiple layers of it, and that really takes somebody to go through and help people process that are very talented in that field. And so yeah, if somebody's in that stuck pattern and everything else with them, and it was caused by integration of multiple different emotions and pathways all at once, then it really does take somebody very skilled to go through that. But talk therapy and everything else has been limited because you're not necessarily changing some of the stress chemistry or some of the pathways as well. So you need to change the hardware and the software, if that analogy is.
Yeah. And some of the psychologists actually don't believe that you should be in charge or responsible for healing yourself, which is also a problem. So if you go to a practitioner that doesn't actually think you should have a positive result or outcome, you're forever trying to resolve these things. I do want to pick up just a little bit before we are out of time on the episode about checking out the 𝑚asteryourlife.ca website. There's a technology there called Genius Biofeedback, which is bioresonance and biofeedback that people can actually put on a device and have in their hand or on their iPad or whatever piece of technology they want to use it on. And by that, they can actually get feedback on what's going on in their body. Have you ever used tech like that, Dr. Dave?
Biofeedback's is, once again, a great system. So yeah, you can go off heart rate, you can go off different temperature in the extremities, all sorts of different devices are out there. And the main thing is to find the one that works great and that you're going to use quite commonly. But what a tool to start training you about your own regulation of your own body. And yeah, that's key to speeding up that healing process, because we're quite commonly not aware of our different states until we're like, really, oh my God, I just feel good. Like the jaw tensions is a huge one in people. Like eventually it's so wired that you can't get those jaw muscles to relax on people because they're all way too tensed up. And then, you have to work at other spots of the body to start to get people to relax that tension, angst, anxiety, everything else that goes along with it. So, the other thing is, like, music is such a powerful tool as well. And of course, that's why we should listen to sad music at some points in time. But listening to it too often will get us stuck in that mode.
I listen to it while I'm doing my qigong. So I'm balancing out.
We don't go too well together.
That's right, too. I'm very yin while I'm doing it, though, Dr. Dave. It's not, I'm doing the yin movements. We're out of time for this episode. Thank you, Dr. Dave Hardy, for your wonderful wisdom. Just so much appreciate you being part of the Master Your Life podcast. And everyone, please love each other, love yourselves, mind your minds. That's all for us. Bye for now.
Thank you for being a part of our program today. Master Your Life is a presentation of Leaha Mattinson Enterprises, Inc. Join us next time on Master Your Life. helping you to discover the very best of you.